I'll try to make the introduction to this as blunt as can be because I want all the people clicking on this to see what I'm getting at right away. NetEase does not see people as more than dollar signs, and I don't think that you should defend every action they do over listening to people from the community who have complaints or gripes that go outside of your scope or perspective. It's okay to enjoy something despite it having problems, but that does not mean you should ignore or enable these problems just because you can enjoy it. It is okay if you weren't personally advocating for Lunella to be in the game, but that does not validate disregarding that outcry of people who were, and people who wish to discuss NetEase's treatment of black characters. I think plenty of people like it when they stick to the comics for the game, but I don't think we should pretend like this is a story-focused game, and that sticking to the comics to a T isn't a strange approach to have when it comes to excluding a black character, but not something they take issue with when it comes to including others or changing around their kits and lore to make them more interesting to play in this game. The world we live in and the media we consume is often marred by biases, and there's nothing wrong with accepting and analyzing that, whether those biases apply to you specifically or not. I think the most important thing we can do is have a stern but healthy and informed dialogue about this whole thing, and I would like it if you stuck around and listened to my thoughts in the video. Anyways, thank you to all the people who decided to stay through the beginning of the video. This whole Lunella situation has unfortunately been on my mind a lot recently, and I feel like the more I see from people around the community, the less I have it in me not to speak my mind more about it. As you may have been able to surmise from the intro, the way some people have spoken about and navigated this situation just does not sit right with me, and I generally don't agree with the way a lot of people have approached this or the angles that they've come from about defending NetEase. I think defending a billion-dollar company in any way, shape, or form is generally a little cringe, but the things I've seen have at best perplexed me and at worst made me think that some of the people speaking on it don't really even know what they're arguing for. Marvel Rivals is a game that strikes a much more casual audience than the comics or hell even some of the MCU at this point. It's very self-contained and does much of its own world building and storytelling, while generally staying comic booky enough to keep more dedicated nerds' attention, but staying low-key enough to not confuse or scare away any people who are getting into Marvel products through this game. It's good that this game can be a welcoming gateway into the community of comic books and characters, and I do hope people discover characters and stories that they really enjoy through this game. Now, with that being said, I would really like it for the larpers who seem to suddenly know everything about a character because they read through the wiki page to stop commenting on stuff about the Lunella situation. I generally think there's nothing to be gained by parroting the same talking points and commentating that you don't know anything about Moon Girl and that she can't be added into the game because she's a child. I also think it's extremely worthless to say stuff like, I don't care about Lunella, I just want the big dinosaur. I think that if you can't find some room to learn about and appreciate the character he's been primarily paired with for the better part of more than 10 years, I think you maybe don't really care about the character much more than the optics. It's okay to like Devil because he looks cool and is fun to play. I have no problem with that. I have a problem with people who are taking that framework and making it the basis of a nothing burger commentary on why people are making a big deal out of this. Even if you don't think so because it doesn't affect you and you don't care, it is a big deal. It's weird for white people to swoop in and try to minimize the feelings of the people who do have opinions on it and are potentially outraged by it, especially stepping on the toes of marginalized voices. I'm not trying to insinuate that white people cannot speak on issues like this or even have opinions on it, but when large faces of the community comment on this and their thoughts aren't to consult any other sources or conspirators that could potentially make up for the context, knowledge, or perspective that they're lacking, and boil it down to simplistic surface level arguments that either don't really get at the heart of what people are upset about, or generally display ignorance about the conversation and context that is being argued and discussed in, it really irks me. I don't believe that NetEase is the second coming of the KKK or that they're interested in participating in some culture war nonsense. However, they make a lot of weird decisions specifically with their black characters that make it hard to just ignore. In the last video where I talked about this, I brought up the Black Panther and Storm wedding skin as an example of the scraps that they've thrown to people of color. To elaborate on that further, I'd like to point out that contrary to the other wedding skins we've gotten, Black Panthers and Storms were released to the Battle Pass with little fanfare, as well as just being epic skins, as opposed to the legendary skins and general bombast and flair that the Life Fantastic and Mr. and Mrs. X skins have gotten. Things like that make it feel as if they were more concerned with checking off a box rather than having genuine interest in its inclusion. It feels more out of obligation than any inspiration. These sort of behaviors in isolation wouldn't be something to blow out of proportion. However, when you have a history that shows other instances of weird behavior, the coincidences start to become a pattern and the patterns start to become a trend. The trend seems to point to someone at NetEase or maybe Marvel or Disney finding reasons to justify the behavior that they've shown us, and I don't really think that the reasonable conclusion for a lot of people is to pretend like this behavior doesn't exist at all. Especially in the world we live in, where there are plenty of people that would be happy walking back to the civil rights era if it meant they don't have to navigate tough conversations or do things they're uncomfortable with. Especially considering the guy in America that was willingly let back into office, there are some people out there who generally do not concern themselves about the erosion and straight up erasure of marginalized people from the public eye. And that's not to say everyone who doesn't care about this or doesn't emphatically love Lunella is a racist or anything, but there's a real cultural problem happening throughout our general society where problems like these can't just be overlooked. It's not going to move mountains, but showing genuine concern and care for how minorities are treated and portrayed in media, regardless of if they do or don't look like you, and standing by others when they do speak up about something or say it doesn't sit right with them is still important. Showing solidarity does matter. It's okay to enjoy something despite its problems, but don't act like those problems don't exist at all. The bar will never be raised if people get defensive at the mere mention of it existing. And it certainly won't be when people who aren't familiar with it speak on it as if they do. To end things off, my opinion is that is an incredibly lazy and convenient excuse to say that they couldn't have included Lunella due to her being a child, and it comes off as hollow to say she wouldn't have been Lunella if she was aged up. Not least of all due to the fact that this is a game where telling a compelling narrative takes a massive backseat to Marvel characters fighting each other and what amounts to a power fantasy clash between action figures. Enjoying Marvel Rivals requires such little knowledge of the characters and their origins, and that's what makes it such a good entry point for so many people, as well as it being a very easy vehicle for people who don't know what they're talking about to make ill-informed comments. Background knowledge and context mostly elevates the enjoyment some people get out of playing certain characters and hearing certain interactions, and considering the liberties and changes NetEase have already made, making a character older isn't the hard line NetEase makes it out to be. Lunella is much more than a child prodigy. She's an entire character, and making her older doesn't rob her of that. All they did was find a reason not to include a black character that's the entire other half of this duo. And it's funny that they claimed the themes of this season were reunion when they willingly split up the characters themselves. I don't think I would be nearly as upset about it if it weren't for the fact that they dangled the prospect of her being playable in front of people, just to say that they pretty much don't plan on making it a possibility. I think it's important to acknowledge the muddy implications of some of the things that NetEase does, and also the fact that this isn't the first time in their history that they've had these conversations about them. And also, if you don't know much about a subject, it's okay to ask someone else and listen rather than to try to brute force your way into speaking on something you don't understand. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate it, and I'd also be curious to know what you thought and also what characters and other representation you'd like to see added into the game, because black people obviously aren't the only people that should be represented. I'd like for every other type of different superheroes to be represented too. South Asian, South American, more South American, African, add more of everybody. That's what I honestly think. And also, don't do a shitty job at it either. Anyways, drink water and stuff. I don't know. Have a nice day.